Welcome, everyone. My name is Nisha. I'm really glad to have you here today to join me for our Lunch and Learn. I'm really looking forward to sharing and introducing some information on behavioral interventions to support young children. We're going to be here together for about an hour today. Today, you'll have access to the Q&A, that chat, and I may send some pulse checks every so often to ensure everyone's on the same page. You can give me a thumbs up or thumbs down. I'll send one right now so you can get a little sample of that. All right. So how is everyone doing this afternoon? Ready to learn, get some new information. So a little bit about me. I am an occupational therapist. I grew up on the East Coast and went to school at Quinnipiac University. I started my career in Baltimore, Maryland at Kennedy Krieger Institute. Did a split position with home-based services and clinic-based services there, and then moved to New York City for a couple of years. Did early intervention and early childhood. And then I have been here in Illinois for the last 20 years. I've worked in a variety of settings, working with children from birth all the way up to 18. I've worked in a variety of settings, currently have my own practice, do mainly early intervention, early childhood, and do see a few kids that are older. And they range from very mild needs to more significant things going on for them. I'm involved in a lot of different organizations to really understand how to best support families, and I really love what I do. So we are here to talk about some behavioral interventions. The disclosures for today, you're welcome to read those. So how many of us work with clients and children who appear to have some challenging behaviors, right? We may see some kids who experience some crying, some non-compliance, aggression, inattention, defiance, tantrums, and maybe some self-injurious behaviors, right? And it could be children that are very young and some children that are older, right? We need to understand that children's behaviors are not just good or bad, right? They're meaningful signals of their needs, experiences, and development. And when we pause to see the child in context and prioritize relationships, we can really shift from judging behavior to understanding it, from reacting to it to responding to it. And with this understanding, this foundational understanding of why behaviors emerge and the importance of relationships and context, we are better equipped to explore targeted behavioral intervention strategies that can really support children's development and well-being. So the most important thing that I really want to start with is that relationship, attachments, connection, and bonds are really the foundation of it all for our kids, for us as people, right? It's really, really important. So with that, right, from early on, we want to support our families, caregivers, everyone that's involved with the child to really be able to help their child develop a strong foundation. And that really starts with the ability to co-regulate. When we have caring, consistent relationships with adults, our children really get those external supports that really serve as a basis for developing self-regulation. Self-regulation is the ability to manage our emotions, behaviors, in accordance with the demands of situations. And then our kids start understanding that emotional regulation, those external and internal processes that really help us monitor, evaluate, modify our reactions to emotions, right? And when we have that happening, there might be triggers, causes, right? Things that happen in our day. There's things that are always happening and evolving, right? There's no one static situation throughout the day. It's always, always changing. And so there might be a trigger or a cause, and we have to recognize what is happening. Look at where is it happening and how is it being handled, right? There's so many different components to that situation that we, the adults, right, along with the caregivers, really need to look at and see. And then we have to examine them a little bit more. Is there a medical component? Is it an environmental component, right, of the situation, the people, all the sensory aspects of it, so many different things. And then that social environment also. Look at, is it happening consistently? Is it only happening in one situation? Getting to that root cause takes time, and it's not always easy to identify. And many times, most often, right, there's many different issues. It's very complex. And so we really need to think about that when we're developing plans. Sometimes our behaviors, lots of times actually, our behaviors have communicative intent, right, or function. And that refers to the purpose of the gestural, vocal, verbal act or behavior, right, that's intended to convey information to others. Communication enables children to interact with their environment. The behavior serves as a purpose, right? And so that child might be trying to request, to label or describe, comment on something that's happening, express their emotions, show some protest, right? Or refusal. They might be directing their attention or someone else's attention. It might serve as social interaction. It may also be there for questions, right? So many different reasons that behavior might be serving a function of communication. There's always a reason why we have a behavior, right? It's upon us to really look at what is that communication? What is that behavior for? And so this is a sample worksheet that I like to use. Sometimes it's in conversation with a family, a caregiver, a teacher, a child care provider, right? And you can adapt it to whatever their day or routine looks like, those daily sequences. So this one, for example, has some key events, wake up time, breakfast time, play, lunch, quiet time, snack, play again, right? We hope our kids are playing throughout their day, dinner time, and bedtime. And sometimes through that discussion with that caregiver, we'll talk about some of those challenging behaviors. Maybe we're just going to look at that piece, right? What part of the day goes really smooth? What part of the day is a little bit more tricky? And then we might start looking at who is this child? What interests them? What motivates them? Where are they struggling, right? And when we've taken all of our evaluations, our assessments, our observations, the information that we've gathered, right, we're going to start identifying some strategies and activities. So again, this is a process, right? It's not a simple cut and paste activity. It's very individualized and developed through lots of communication and information gathering. So this one's a little bit more designed for a child that's older, right? Going to school, coming home, that homework piece, maybe some activities also. So more for a school-aged child. What we want to get to is, right, if we can break it down. We've looked at the relationship, we've looked at, where is this happening? Now we really want to get into that situation. And so we might look at the ABCs of behavior. What is the antecedent? What's the event that occurred immediately before that behavior? What was the behavior, right? What did that child do that interfered maybe with the interaction, learning, that daily task? And the consequence, what happened as a result of that behavior? There are three different portions that we really want to carefully observe, notice, document, right? To see what is happening. And then we want to look at what's the reason for the behavior, right? What was the function of that behavior for the child? That gets to the why. Is it because they were seeking attention, interaction? Was it positive interaction or attention they were seeking? Or maybe negative, right? Sometimes we don't always use that strength-based approach. We're not always noticing, commenting, providing that feedback. And it's not because we don't want to, right? Maybe it's just we didn't notice, or there's 10 other kids in the classroom or the daycare setting, the childcare setting. There could be many reasons, but that child might notice if I do something that I'm not supposed to, somebody's going to respond right away. And so then we develop this pattern. It might be because they're looking for access to desired object, person or activity. Maybe they're trying to escape a situation or avoid something that might be a little difficult, uncomfortable, challenging. Maybe they're seeking some sensory input. It could be movement, right? How many of our kids are constantly moving because their body needs that movement for regulation? Maybe they're looking for a tactile sense, a flavor, a taste, many different types of sensory input. Maybe it's a combination, right? And so we need to recognize, look, think, um, review our paperwork, right? Talk to our team members to kind of get to what is the why in this situation. And so again, right, this is where those relationships come into play. They're a critical component. When we can take that pause, right, and we can be more responsive versus reactive, maybe we're going to realize, we're going to recognize, we're going to see the perspective of the child to really shift our approach and our plan and maybe that intervention strategy. So it really comes back to that, and we have to be very mindful of that. So some of those strategies for behavior management, right? When we, first of all, again, recognize those relationships, right? And what's going on, looking for some strategies because our children benefit from some of that. We as people, right? We might have our planners, we might have our schedules. It just helps us know how to prepare for our day and go through our day. So predictable, effective routines. This doesn't need to be a rigid schedule. 9 o'clock, we have to do this, but what is that sequence? What is that transition? What are we doing? Maybe that's going to shift, right? At school versus home, weekdays versus weekends. But there's some routines for our kids. It helps us as their caregivers. It helps them. It helps that environment. Modeling, teaching, practicing, and reviewing expectations, right? They don't get it the first time. We don't get it the first time. And so looking at how are we modeling it? Looking at our position, eye contact, our language, right? When we're doing that, do we need to decrease the number of steps maybe? How are we giving opportunities to that child to practice that? If we're working with a younger child and the parent or caregiver, are we inviting them to practice? We giving them an opportunity for that? Do we expect them to do it, or do we share? Are we recognizing their style? Are we maybe reflecting upon that? How did that feel for you to the child? They can sometimes tell us very insightful information. Maybe that parent, right? Maybe they're expecting that they need to get it right the first time. Maybe they feel like they can't say, you know what, I think I need a little more help. And so making sure we create that environment for them. Identifying motivators and interests, right? We need to find out, what does this child love, enjoy? How can we use that, right, in that behavior management plan, in the strategy? Because we all do better when we are engaged in activities that interest us, right, that we're good at. And so really thinking about, let's make a list of everything that you love or that you notice that your child enjoys, right, involving caregivers and parents in that. As a child's getting older, asking them, right, what are your 3 favorite things to do? How did that go? Building in simple incentives, right? We don't get a prize for everything, but can we maybe establish a goal or work towards something in a healthy way? Reflection, those reflective opportunities are so important. Maybe using a phrase, I wonder, right? What do you think? When we give that opportunity to practice, think about, reflect on, that child or parent can give us a lot of useful information, right? For them to think, what did that feel like? How did that go? Did it go the way I anticipated? Do I need some additional supports, right? Again, making those activities engaging and fun because we stay with things that we like, right? If we're not interested, if we're not doing well at it, we're going to kind of get distracted. We're going to do something else. Really focusing on the positive behavior. Sometimes there's a lot going on and we get into that cycle, right? Don't do that. Are your listening ears on? Whatever it might be. And it's not as positive. So really thinking about that praise, that strengths-based approach, and with your teams, with your caregivers, right? Really looking at the root cause of what is going on for that child in that situation. There can be so many things that can change day to day, but putting on a temporary band-aid isn't really going to solve the issue or support that child and that caregiver, that family for the long term. So it's really important to think of that. And that last piece is sometimes just using logical consequences, right? Sometimes when we're working on something, a plan, a goal, a strategy, and it doesn't go the way that we anticipated, maybe for the child, for the parent, using that logical consequence. We don't have to fix everything in that moment. Sometimes a little bit of disappointment, a little bit of emotion, sadness, whatever that might be, that might just be the result, and we can be there to support that child through that. But really thinking about that. We really want to make sure we have attunement and responsiveness in those relationships when we're supporting these behaviors and management of them with our plans of action, right? It still comes back to that relationship and that support. Maybe we're using those external motivators, right? It's not always a physical reward system, but that might be in conjunction with, right? And so if we know that that child is really motivated, interested, right, it might be that social piece, activity, a tangible reward. Maybe there's some symbol that when you get this, snacks, sometimes it's fun, right? We don't want to have bad habits, right? But there might be a treat, and that's okay in certain situations. Maybe we're going to use more of a positive, caught you being good jar. Maybe it's just more one-on-one time of whatever the child wants to do with that caregiver. It can be an object, an item, a special outing. Maybe as our kids get older, they're really motivated for that money and we're going to use that, right? And so as long as it's used, that external motivator, appropriately, right, in conjunction with other pieces, that can be okay, right? We want to look at those new behaviors, that motivation. Maybe it's to decrease a behavior. Maybe it's for increased participation in activities of daily living, chores. Maybe there's a plan, right, for academics. Sometimes we have to get through our math homework and we need some motivators there or something to work towards. Maybe we're using a sensory strategy in addition, right? If that child needs it for the regulation and modulation, we really need to give them that input for that. But in addition to maybe they just like that toy, that tactile input, right? So there's a fine line between that, and we have to be really attuned to that also. We really want to support the effort, not the end result, right? And really make some observations, some comments to support that for the child. It can really make a difference for them. And we're really helping to develop that perseverance, that grit, so that child can really develop that mindset, right? A growth mindset opposed to that fixed mindset. And when we're working with children, we're working with adults too, right? We're working with their caregivers, and sometimes we're doing this to support that dynamic also, right? It's not just always about the child. We have to take a step back and look at the big picture, and that's really important in the work that we do. We want to support those positive improvements. So it takes some time, right, to understand who is this child. Maybe we're helping that caregiver, that parent, that child care individual, that teacher, whoever it is, that grandparent, understand, okay, this is that child, this is their style, this is their temperament. Maybe it takes a little moment to reflect upon us, the adults, right, and our temperament. Is there a match? Is there a mismatch? Do we need to shift a little bit to support that child? We have to make sure we're being clear concise, right? In what we're telling them, the expectations. We want to really make sure that we have attainable short-term goals. Sometimes they're so big and it's going to be really hard to get to them. Maybe it's almost not even possible. And so is that fair, right? Breaking it down, achieving that success, feeling good about that, and then adding another component, right? Making sure that it's developmentally appropriate for that child. Some of our kids, there's a discrepancy between that chronological age and that development, and really being attuned to that, really using that positive feedback, praise, active listening, right? Again, our children, our families, they give us a lot of information, and sometimes it's with very good intent. We are moving very quickly and we're not hearing everything. And so, really making sure when we're asking questions, we're listening, right? And we're creating opportunities for that. And along with that is asking questions, right? Asking open ended questions that really provide lots of information, right? That's important versus just a yes, no, going down a quick checklist. So, thinking about that, right? Being child led versus adult led. We really want our kids to lead, right? In certain situations, certain times we have to get stuff done, and it could be in the school environment, the home environment, but maybe some flexibility in that, right? What motivates that child again? What do they enjoy? Can we bring that into a more challenging task to kind of shift it for them? Avoiding the power struggle when we can, when we're noticing that, right? And we recognize that, pausing, right? What can we do to shift this? Because every time it ends up being a power struggle and then it gets very emotional. And then maybe that child is using more intense behaviors, right? And so having that proactive approach, helping parents, helping children avoid those comparisons. Sometimes it's natural, but it can lead to difficult situations. Really validating, acknowledging the child, maybe the caregiver in that moment too. When we can name it, then we can tame it, right? And so acknowledging for that moment, this is hard, that was sad, it was difficult, right? Whatever it might be, I notice that you're really trying. Just stating that much can kind of decrease some of that anxiety, right? And help us feel that, yeah, that's what we were experiencing. And then together, we can decide what we're going to do to support, to shift that outcome. Really being calm in that moment. Sometimes we talk a lot, right? And that pause, choosing our words, our tone, our body language, our facial expressions can really shift things too. Choosing to de escalate that situation, it can be really hard. And we have to be mindful of some of those MSR strategies. If anybody here has taken the FAN training, definitely borrowing that phrase from there, mindful self-regulation. What helps us? Because sometimes when there's behaviors, it gets a little intense, we start getting dysregulated. And so ensuring that we can take that breath, we can count, we can take a pause, whatever it is in that moment, to regulate ourselves to be able to de-escalate that situation, right, is very, very important. And we have to take some time to think about that when we are supporting children and families that might be experiencing some challenging behaviors. Really acknowledging those feelings. That goes again with the validating the child, labeling that emotion can be another piece of putting that picture together. Problem solving. Maybe we can't problem solve in that moment when the emotions are really high and intense. We might have to wait and revisit. Maybe we're just, simply problem solving right now, and then we're going to come back to it to really get into what happened, how did this affect you? How did this affect the other people in the environment? What could we do next time? What worked? What didn't work? And that's really that reflective thinking that really helps to process when we can wonder, when we can be curious, with the child, with the family, with the caregiver, we can really put a better picture together with supports in place for next time and in the future. Thinking about accommodations, modifications, what do we have in place? And this comes back to really looking at all the paperwork that we get. And sometimes there's a lot, and I recognize we are balancing a lot, but making some intentional time to really review that paperwork. Looking at those evaluations, if we've gotten them, if we haven't, that intake information so we can be best prepared for that evaluation assessment process, ensuring that we rule out any medical concerns or needs if they're being addressed, making sure that we're following up on those to get any updates, right? Oh, I noticed that they were going to go see a specialist. Did that happen? If it did you get your results? Have there been any changes, medication, plan of action? Really important to get that information to be more informed and indicate that as we're going on. Really looking at the organization, the setup, the physical environment, the people that are there to support. That's really important to that child's success or to that challenging situation. What can we do? Do we need to move this to a different part of the classroom? At home, do we need to support that learning environment or that desk area? Is it that transition from bed to, from dinner to getting ready for bed and going to bed that really gets challenging, right? Sometimes the end of the day, everything starts falling apart. And so can we problem solve with the child, with the parent, as a team to look at, well, maybe we need to start this a little bit earlier. Maybe we need to decrease the number of steps, right? Maybe we can't go upstairs, downstairs. We got to kind of stay in one area of the house to decrease less of that transition. So really thinking about that too. Consistency, again, this doesn't mean rigidity and sameness with every aspect of that routine or that activity, but really looking at how can we give that child some consistency so they know what to expect and we can support that with that challenging time, right? That's going to help them over time. Maybe we're going to change some things. We're going to help them generalize those activities. Looking at sensory smart activities. We all have different regulation styles, all different kinds of sensory modulation needs. And so is there something that we've noticed, right? When we give that child an opportunity to move, that really helps and supports them. Is it something or a motor tool, right? That when we give them a chewy tube or a cold drink, a straw cup, it's calming, it's organizing. Can we add that to this routine or this challenging task? Making sure we're communicating, right? Are we sharing what the expectations are? Are we talking about what those transitions might be? Are we helping to cue the child through a gesture? Are we using a visual, auditory cue? Are we providing feedback? Those are all very important. When we're thinking of those accommodations, more at that IEP level in that school and environment, that's looking at same, certain learning outcomes, those same as peers with access to curriculum and the same grading as peers. When we're looking at modifications, there might be different learning outcomes, giving different tools to experience the curriculum, and grading might be adapted to the child's developmental level. So I think that's important to kind of just understand those differences. When we're looking at these accommodations, modifications, we're looking at all different environments, all different routines for that child. It could be more specific to an activity. Maybe it's more general. We could be looking at dressing, grooming activities, maybe at the beginning of the day versus at the end of the day or in between. Play times, right? That can be difficult. And it's part of typical development to have some behaviors, right? That's part of growing up. meal times, looking at desk work, academics, how a child is able to interact with peers. Maybe that's sitting at circle time in a group. Maybe we need a smaller group versus bigger. How they're able to participate in writing, reading, classwork activities, those academics. How they're able to succeed at home when they're not in that school environment once they get to that age. Are we seeing any discrepancies, differences with school versus home? That's going to give us some really useful information. How do transitions go? Transitions within activities, transitions within environments. Um, what are we noticing with some of those playground activities, recess activities? Sometimes it's really hard to, or really easy to get outside, right, and engage in them. But that transition in can be really difficult. And so looking at, is it because it's too loud inside or the sound really travels? It's very hard. Is it because that child really craves movement and they really do well when they have that opportunity to move their bodies? And can we bring that in to the classroom, to the home, wherever it might be, when that child is experiencing some challenges? So really looking at that. Another very important piece when we're looking at behaviors, challenging situations, we need to collect some information. And some of us are data, we love those numbers, right? And some of us are like, that's really hard for me. It gets to be difficult. But when we have good data and we're collecting it and we are on top of it, it's really going to let us know what's working and what's not working. And sometimes we have, the best plan in place, but when we look at the information, the plan isn't really supporting that change. And so we need to go maybe reevaluate or make some shifts and pivots, right? So looking at the ABC information, again, that antecedent, that behavior, that consequence, what have we noticed, right? Before, during, and after. Looking at the length of time or maybe intensity of that challenging behavior or situation, documenting where is it happening, right? Is it at home, school, every environment, playground, bus stop, with siblings, with one, some of our kids are in different households. Is it only happening in one household versus another? Again, that's not to say that that caregiver is the cause of it. Maybe there's a certain way that the routine's done. Maybe there's a relational need for that child or some disconnect that we can maybe look at a little bit further. What are the strategies in place? Are they working? Are they not? Maybe we need to shift that. What were the specific strategies used in the moment? Oh, that seemed to work, but this didn't, right? And then we can reevaluate where to go next with that. So we want to keep it simple. We want to be consistent. It's very important to collect this data in a way that we can access it easily, and we can bring it to our teams to really think about, reflect on what we want to keep and what we might need to shift. Teaming and collaboration, this is just a really big one for me. I think anything that we're doing, we need to talk to our teams. We need to communicate. We need to collaborate. The child and the family are an essential part of our team. We need to meet them where they're at. We need to gather information, their thoughts, right? Get a clear picture of what is going on, asking them if they have some input. What do you think is going to help? What do you think isn't going to help? What do you think of this idea, right? That's going to really help us create a better plan of action. We want to see where they're at. We want to link strategies to their identified concerns and priorities. Sometimes we really get stuck with our own plans. And depending on in our environments, where we're supporting this child, is it in the clinic, is it in the school, is it in early intervention, is it at the home? We have a little bit of flexibility, or maybe not so much flexibility in that piece. If we're in the school, there might be goal that's related to academics, right? And the educational aspect that we have to address. Maybe if we're in early intervention, it can be a family outcome. We have to look at where that is, but bring in what is important to that child. What are they motivated by? What kind of learner are they? If it's the caregiver, again, child care provider, parent, grandparent, nanny, babysitter, uh, teacher, whoever it is, recognizing makes our job a little bit harder in our role, but we do need to take some time to recognize what is their learning style? How do they communicate? What can I do to share information in a way that is important to that caregiver, that they can understand, they can relate to, is relevant to them and the child, right? Um, that's really, really important to think about and reflect upon when we're doing our work. We want to communicate on an ongoing basis. And that includes two different pieces. It's gathering information and sharing information. Again, letting families know you're important, your voice is important, how you do things, certain routines, your culture, your family, your beliefs, your values, right? That might impact how that child is able to participate in everyday activities. It might impact, right, the challenges that they're having. And so let's learn about them and figure out what we can do together to help that child succeed with whatever activity, to decrease the challenge of that behavior, really looking at what's going on in that situation. It's also to share information too. And so thinking about how do we communicate with the entire team? Sometimes if we're working in the school, we don't see parents or caregivers. That can be really, very often, and that can be difficult. Is there a way to use a HIPAA compliant system? Are we using a communication notebook? How are we talking to different providers? Sometimes, again, there's private OT, speech, whoever that might be. There might be school-based. There might be aqua therapist, whoever's involved. Again, making sure that we have consent and permission and are using it HIPAA compliant and FERPA compliant platforms to communicate, because it's very important. I know what's going on so that I can shift things, right? I can share information. Maybe if the PT that's at the clinic tells me, the school OT, something, I might be able to change the positioning because I know it's very hard for that child. It's impacting their respiration, whatever it might be in that situation. But it can help me with my plan, and really, most importantly, help that child and caregiver with whatever might be going on. And really, it's so important that teaming and collaboration to empower the family, to empower the child. They are going to be the best advocate for themselves. And in that process, we also, a part of our job and our role is to empower parents and caregivers. We're not always going to be with them. We really want them to recognize what their child is good at, where they have some real assets, right? And strengths, and how they can share that. And when that child needs some support, that they can use their voice to really get whatever that child needs to succeed. And so ensuring we have that communication in place, we're building that trust. It does not happen overnight. It takes some time to develop that rapport and to really build that collaborative partnership. And using that strength-based approach and framework is so pivotal in the work that we do. And so being mindful of that, thinking about small shifts in your practice, maybe of where you can start to just maybe make little changes, and how you see that impacting the work that you do. All right. So that reflective thinking that I referred to a little bit in a few slides before, the opportunity to think about what we are doing, helping our caregivers, teachers, childcare providers, parents, grandparents, whoever, think about what they're doing to support the child. Really how they're learning information, learning about activities, academics, environment to support the child, reflecting upon, is this developmentally appropriate? Can the child even achieve this? Is this a fair expectation? Is the child interested or not? And again, some things we have to get done, right? That's just part of life. But is there a way we can increase that interest level? Looking at, did we communicate what we expected clearly in a way that the child could fully understand? Do we need to do it in a different way? Does it need to be, visually, auditorily? Do we need to check in, right? How's this child's executive function? Are there some challenges? And so let's reflect upon that to make some shifts to support them. And we should always be taking some time to consider the child's perspective. What are they noticing? What are they wanting? What are they missing, right, in the situation? And when we can support that caregiver to really think about these different elements, it's going to help support the bigger picture. And that child, depending on their age, their ability, we might adjust this. But what happened? How did it feel? What could we do differently? And also getting them to have that reflective perspective. I wonder if we did this. I wonder if we give your little brother a turn first. I wonder if you could tell your friend that that really was difficult when she called you that name or whatever that might be. Will that maybe shift the behavioral challenge that we were noticing? And so that reflective thinking and capacity is a really important aspect that we need to consider. And whenever we are looking at challenging behaviors, plans, strategies, interventions, whatever we're doing in our roles to support children and their families, really having that proactive approach and that thought before the activity to support that success. And so again, it is really looking at the information first, taking all of that, asking follow-up questions, probing questions, getting a very clear picture or the most that we can get. And then taking it a little further when we're looking at a certain situation, activity, set it up for success. Look at the time of day, the duration, right? Is it right before bedtime? That might be hard. Or is it when lots of things are happening in the environment? Really look at the time, the duration, the environmental setup. Who's there to support the child? What does that transition look like? Do we have to simplify that? Do we need to add other components? And what are the supports in place, right? Physical supports, the people supports, the self-established supports, maybe use of a timer, visual schedule, making sure we have the just right challenge. And that changes all the time for us as individuals and for kids especially. And so making sure it's not too hard and it's not too easy. It's the just right challenge. And making sure when we're talking to children, when we're talking to their families, their team members, their teachers, whoever it might be, thinking about prioritizing needs and goals. We can't do everything at once. That's just too much. And so really thinking and asking, excuse me, is this important right now? And how important is this? Maybe we need to prioritize a little bit. Excuse me, to really help achieve some success. And so considering that, putting it out there, and giving some time to process and think about it, and then engage in a conversation with that child if they're old enough, or with that family and team member. So those strategies that we use all the time, continuing to use them, providing access to them. Maybe it's redirection, modeling, making sure it's not just hopeful modeling. We're asking and inviting for active participation and feedback, and reflective opportunities, consistent routines, making sure we're creating opportunities, managing expectations, looking at the developmentally appropriate aspect of the play or the routine, using multisensory approach to really support that learning and those strategies, identifying motivators, stressors, environments, people that really support the child, or maybe add another component that makes it a little more difficult, and scaffolding. These are all really important and helpful, and using a variety of them can really support the child and the family too. All right, want to ask another pulse check on how we're doing here. I'm looking at the chat also in here. Great. Oh, I forgot to start that pulse check. Seasons are changing and I got my cold, so sorry about that, everyone. A little bit sniffly today. All right, I sent that pulse check, so you guys, they're starting to come in. If anyone has any questions. All right. So as we're kind of looking and continuing, thank you for giving me those pulse checks. I appreciate it. You know, again, I started with this and I think it's so important, so foundational. Relationships is where it all begins, and really looking at any adverse situations, any issues that might be going, making sure we're asking those questions to make sure we have a clear picture, and really recognizing the importance of that. There isn't going to be any type of motivator, any type of behavior plan, any type of anything if we're not looking at the relationship too. So it's really all of that together, and that comprehensive approach to a certain activity, to a certain behavior, to a certain interaction that is really going to make that shift and support the child. And so we have to be really mindful of that. So as we're kind of coming up to the end here, before we kind of break for some questions and answers, we really, again, want to look at what does success look like, right? What are we hoping for this child? What are we wanting to support them with? How can we set it up for that level of success? And that could be changing all the time, right? Where are we starting? Making sure it's the just right challenge and appropriate for that child. And then prioritizing those needs and goals. We cannot do everything at once. As individuals, as team members, that child can't. And so being really aware of that and recognizing sometimes we overdo it, the family does, whoever does. It's okay when we recognize that and we pivot and shift, right? We want to identify what went wrong or not optimal, and then use it as a learning experience. And so remembering that in the work that we do, appreciate everything you do to support children and families. It can be really difficult and complex, and it's always individualized and changing. And so we're always juggling a lot, but remembering to take some time to take care of yourselves too in the work that you're doing, so that you can be there to support all the different children and families that you're working with. So I'm going to pause here for a second, check to see if anybody has any questions in that chat. Any thoughts, any experiences, any resources. This is just kind of a nice time to share a little bit of information. We do have a 2-hour webinar that gets into a little bit more information, as well as other ones that support, again, challenging behaviors. There's more to it, right? And we really have to look at why is it happening and what we can do to support that the best that we can with that team approach in a kind of getting to that root cause and then working up from there. All right, so looking at the questions, no one has any questions? Any thoughts in here? I am here to kind of support you and what you need with that. Well, it's been wonderful having you here today and to be able to have some time together to think of, these behavior plans, intervention strategies that we are always so committed to, but really pausing, thinking about why is it happening and what we can do to support that child, that caregiver, and ultimately that family well-being to set them up for success and positive experiences. Thank you, everyone. I am going to stick around for a few more minutes. If anybody has any questions, thoughts, wanted to run something by the group, please feel free to pop them in the Q&A. Otherwise, I hope you have a wonderful afternoon. And thanks again for all that you do. All right. We have a question. How do we help with criticism from fellow kids? Yeah, that can be really, really hard. And I think we have to look at peers, right? And social interactions can be difficult. And so thinking about where are we seeing this child? What is the challenge that is happening? Is this in the school, classroom, academic environment? Is this in the lunchroom, at the playground? Is this after school? We want, this is, there's no simple answer for this one, as we all know, right? How is it that we want to support that child to be confident, come up with some self-regulation strategies, and then when that child can be as regulated as possible, right, talk about some coping strategies. What can you do in this situation? How can you advocate for yourself? Do we need to pull in an adult to support with this? So really kind of need to dig deeper with that, but all throughout when we're working with children, we want to make sure that we're giving them support for that self-esteem, confidence, how to problem solve, how to communicate their needs too. Another question in here, should successful goals be more short-term or long-term? So with that question, again, more times than not, we're going to say it could be a lot of different answers, right? Sometimes for me, there might be a long-term that I'm looking at based on, again, depending what environment we're in. If we're in the school, if we're in the home, how old this child is really going to impact that. But along with that longer term outcome, we might have some shorter term outcomes and goals, right? Because that big one, it's going to be hard to achieve. And so what can we do to get to that bigger goal? And so I would say a combination really does work best for me when I'm kind of doing this work. Thank you, Jessica.